Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lorensson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. So we're in the middle of this series, the ABCs of Thriving, and we are on the letter F right now. And Tom, can you start us off and tell me and our listeners what we're going to be talking about in this conversation?
Yep. The F is forgive fearlessly.
I love that. Forgive fearlessly. And so this is what we are going to tackle. And it's such a, this is a giant topic.
Oh, this is like a whole season's worth of things.
Yeah, and just so you know, listeners, we've already had like an hour's conversation where we're like, oh my gosh, this is so big. But yeah, like kick us off, and just, I think it's important every time we talk about, these letters and these words that we're kind of going through, it's just to re-engage with the fact that this is about thriving, not just surviving.
Yes.
And I think that this is so true for this one,
Especially this one.
Especially, I think so. Why is that?
Because this strikes at the very nature of human-to-human interaction. Mm-hmm. Our existence itself. If you are a human, somebody has offended you. Now, to what degree, frequency, all that, that's different. But that it has happened, absolutely. And when we talk about forgiveness, because that's what we're talking about, but I didn't say forgiveness, I said forgive fearlessly. Not forgiveness. Because that is one so dreadfully misunderstood to start with, and so emotionally conflicting and triggering. So when we're talking about forgiveness, and that's really what we're talking about someone has offended you. Someone has done something to harm you in some way. So when something has harmed us, it could be financial, it could be emotional, it could be relational, that triggers the sympathetic nervous system. Why? Because we've been threatened, and not just threatened, but harmed.
I think that's really helpful to know. Because I think we see this topic of forgive or forgiveness as something so emotional and actually
complex.
But I actually think to know that there's a physical thing that's happening as well, and it is emotional, but there's something, and we've talked about this before, we are mind, body, spirit. So we can't separate those things. But I think that I haven't associated that, I haven't thought, oh, someone's harmed me. Oh, probably what's happening in my body.
The sympathetic nervous system has been attacked.
That's not the first thing I'm thinking.
Nope.
But actually, just to know that, I think is reassuring. It's like, okay, of course, something is happening in my body as well as in my emotions here.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that. I thought that was it.
So we sense and perceive a threat to well-being, because not only has there been a threat to well-being, but where there's an offense, there's been harm of some nature. And what happens then is that we, in that tsunami of stress, we begin that escalating flight or fight reaction. Mm-hmm. Flight, flee, or freeze. Both the same thing, look very different, but it's the effort to avoid the threat to well-being. And that can show up as from a mental health perspective. That can be manifested in stress and anxiety, fear, etc., or the fight reaction, which is the alternative and that escalating back and forth. If this is new, listen to the podcast on the tsunami of stress
which
and
was
those core issues, which
yep.
was right off the get-go, because that's what we're dealing with. Mm-hmm. Somebody says or does something that harms us, and a debt, quote unquote, is incurred. Something is now owed.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what do we do with that? Well, if it's surviving, that's a different answer than thriving. And we're talking about thriving, not just surviving.
And honestly, and we'll get to this as well, with a lack of forgiveness, often people aren't even surviving. Often there's a detrimental thing that happens to the person. I mean, you talked to me about this before, just like even physically, what can the physical impacts of living with this holding on to this debt that someone owes you, whatever that is relationally, or that the harm they caused you has caused this kind of debt, and holding on to that and not moving on from that space. Actually, a lot of people don't survive that. A lot of people are sinking in that space.
Yeah. January 2017 Monitor on Psychology from the American Psychological Association, the APA, talks about there are very good reasons to make the effort to forgive. Research has shown that forgiveness is linked to mental health outcomes, such as reduced anxiety, reduced depression, improvement in major psychiatric disorders, as well as fewer physical health symptoms and lower mortality rates. Researchers have amassed enough evidence of the benefits of forgiveness to literally fill a book. Toussaint, Worthington, and Williams edited a 2015 book, Forgiveness and Health.
Wow.
That detailed the physical and psychological benefits of it. Mm-hmm. The inverse side of that are all of those that are mental and physical manifestations of a lack of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Mortality.
I mean, literally life and death here.
It can cost you your life. Because it creates a chronic stress condition to not deal with what is owed.
And even if it doesn't cost you your life and you just survive it, maybe you're in that category where you just survive it.
Right.
But you're certainly not thriving. You see these people like Tom, you see people, who are older and you can tell when someone has lived a life where they haven't forgiven or where they've been harmed and they've carried it. And you can see it in their face, you can see it in their demeanor,
anger,
their whole
anxiety,
presence,
depression,
loneliness, like all of it.
Isolation, all sorts of things. Yeah. And if you're just going to survive, at least do it for that. But to forgive fearlessly, you can thrive.
Okay, so let's talk about the word fearlessly first. We need to, we for sure need to talk about forgive. And like you've already mentioned, it's a word that is, I think we had probably one of our longest conversations pre-recording. Because I'm like, what? Like, like trying to get my head around what this word actually means.
Yes.
But I wonder whether we just should start, before we go there, just touch on why did you choose fearlessly? And it's not, from what I gather, the reason why it's forgive fearlessly, I can't even say that word, fearlessly, is not because what you're not saying is forgive by muscling up, right? That's not what you're saying. Tell us why that word is there.
Because as I started the conversation, this deals with the sympathetic nervous system. We have a sense of flight or fight, a disruption of homeostasis. And again, it's all about homeostasis because as Scott Turner put it, homeostasis is life, which is why it's about survive and thrive. Homeostasis is life. The sympathetic nervous system, we have a flight or fight reaction to harm and the potential for harm and the potential for ongoing harm. And the sympathetic nervous system has this escalating flight or fight reactivity. One of those is fear. And to forgive, one of the things that is a huge barrier to forgiving is fear. Because it's rooted in, I didn't resolve the threat. I didn't address the threat that the offense represented.
So deep down in the root of, if you're struggling, if there's a listener here right now, and there's a situation you're struggling to know how to forgive, one good question would be, what are you fearing?
Yep. What am I afraid of that this offense triggered? Fearless means to not, it's the absence of fear. It's not about fear. Now, a beginning place with forgiving fearlessly, to forgive fearlessly, is to deal with the fear and the anxiety. Then you're in a position to deal with, because now you're dealing with the threat, sensed or perceived, real or imagined. You're dealing with that debt, and I keep using the word debt because that's what this is. There's a reason we use the word forgive when it comes to money. But we're also using the same word to deal with an offense, emotional, relational. It's striking. If you stop and think about it. Why would something that relates to money relate to relationships?
Because of the debt.
Right.
So
There's
that's
some
the thing that
debt that is incurred. My point is, to fearlessly do it is to take fear out of the equation, because you've dealt with the fear involved in it. But not separating out the fear from the debt, you don't allow yourself to deal with the debt because it's entwined with the fear. And we think that if I can just deal with the debt, then the fear will relieve, but it won't.
So it's the other way around.
It's the other way around.
Start with the fear, and then that empowers you to relieve or forgive the debt.
Yes.
That's really helpful. So what we're saying there is that actually, what threatened me? What have I? I mean, I find that a really helpful question, because it's like, I think we're so caught up in, and I'm just relating it to my own experiences where those, I would say that generally speaking, I'm quite a forgiving person, but there are a few instances where I've felt really stuck. And I know I should forgive. It's not that, intellectually.
and you want to.
Yeah, I want to.
Because I'm a forgiving person.
Absolutely. Yes. But I feel stuck. And actually, I'm so caught up in the emotions, and it's almost the surface level emotions. I don't go to that deep level and question, what was I fearing? What threatened me that was so triggering in my life? And that is the starting point.
Yes. To
then kind of climb your way out, so to speak, and be able to go, okay, there is a debt here. So this person owes me something. Now what do I do? But to be able to deal with that without the fear, is a different situation.
Yeah, because fearless means something is lacking fear. And when you take the fear out of the equation, now you're dealing with something entirely different, and it's much less complicated.
So let's talk a little bit about...
Then you can forgive, which then begs the question of, well, what does that word mean to start with?
Well, that's what I was about to say. Let's talk about forgive, because the classic thing, and again in our pre-conversation, the classic thing is saying, we say things like, well, this is about me letting go of something.
Yes.
And, or, just kind of walking away from a situation, or those types of phrases come up. So I think it's helpful to go into this word because it is complicated, and people have either different interpretations, or sometimes people have used it in a way that they shouldn't have used it as well. And there's that knowing its meaning will not only allow us to participate in forgiveness ourselves, but it will also help us understand things like justice and things like, I think that...
Or maybe even engage in it.
Yeah, I think all of this stuff gets enmeshed in this word. So it's a little bit of like pulling apart, like what does it actually mean? So start us off, Tom.
Yep. To forgive, ancient Greek term, charismi, is actually to give something.
Which I'd never really engaged with before. So
no. To give something.
So like the forward giving.
Yes. When we have done something to offend someone else, or someone has done something to offend us, and we're involved in both. Oftentimes when we are in a position where we're considering forgiveness, who are we usually thinking about? Somebody else and what they have done to us. And then conveniently, we seem to just minimize, rationalize, or forget, I am also that.
Yes.
Just somebody else, some other situation. Right? I mean, that's just a human thing to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also, I think partly one of the reasons, like I know for me when I've analysed myself in these spaces, one of the reasons why I get stuck with forgiving is because and there's pride here. We actually think that we wouldn't do what they did, so we're different from them somehow, or that's why so we're not on a level playing field. We're like, they harm me, and actually we're, like you say, conveniently forgetting all of the harm that we're causing around.
Oh yeah, there is that.
Yeah.
But that's not really the issue now. But it is. A lot of that is rooted in our own experience of having done something to harm someone else, and our own lack of resolution about that. We may continue with fear and self-condemnation or shame or guilt about our own having offended somebody else.
And not then when somebody
ourselves. Right. And then when somebody else does it, it's why it often will trigger our own sympathetic nervous system, because it's too much in common with, I've been there myself in some way. And when it has enough in common, that's when that phrase I like to use is, that was then and then is now.
And that could be the fear of like, oh my gosh, like actually the ghost in the closet of I've done this too.
I didn't know what to do with me, and so I don't know what to do with you. Right. And so to forgive, and when you mentioned about the for means forward and that sort of thing, it's progressive, it's right. In the Old English, that was to a place of completeness.
Wow.
Which is interesting.
The for bit meant to a place of completeness.
Yes.
That's amazing. And so
it's not just forward, it's forward to the finish.
So there's something incredibly beneficial that's about a gift
Mm-hmm.
that we get to participate in giving,
Mm-hmm.
that allows us to be in a journey that brings us to this place of completion, which is the thriving.
Yes.
Right?
So to talk about finances, somebody owes you a debt financially.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the phrase I like to use is, when we're not talking money, we're talking about some relational, emotional debt.
Mm-hmm.
The phrase I like to use is, oh, now we're talking about real money.
Well, it's so true. We were talking earlier about how, actually, I mean, and not everyone's like this, but for me, the money thing, like, I wouldn't, it doesn't impact me if
Mm-hmm.
someone just, doesn't pay me something. I know that would be a issue for some people, but that's not as much an issue for me. But relationship wise, when
Mm-hmm.
someone has harmed me or betrayed me, or there's just huge levels of disappointment or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
that is like, so it feels like, oh, that's the real money for me.
Oh, yeah.
That's where it costs me something.
Right. And again, it costs me something. Debt. There is some debt that is owed. And what do we do with the debt? So there can be the application of to forgive, to allow, to give a gift of the forgiving the debt.
Mm-hmm.
The gift is, you don't owe me that anymore. That's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever owed and not been able to repay, you can appreciate what a gift that is.
Mm-hmm.
That's a real gift. I really want to interject, again, this whole unconditional thing. If you think about it, this isn't unconditional. There are conditions. It's just who and how those conditions are addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And to forgive is to give a gift.
I think this is so helpful, Tom, because firstly, I think it really turns a lot of this stuff on its head. Because I think, number one, instead of going, I have to leave, I have to let go, and there is a little bit of letting go. You have to let go of the debt.
Oh,
so there is part of
there
it.
is an addressing it, but it's not a letting go. It's a giving something in place of.
In place of. I think that that really changes a dynamic in my mind. And then the other thing that changes for me is that I feel, and maybe I'm the only person, until this conversation, I feel like with the whole, and I've, in my past, I've been, involved in churches, and I've listened to a zillion sermons on forgiveness. And my overall response to stuff like that is like, okay, yeah, great. I know I should do it. It's like someone's twisting my arm. I know that probably it's better for me, and actually I'm harming myself if I don't forgive, and if I want to be a decent human being, I should probably do that. But it's this like coercion to do it. Like I don't feel encouraged. I don't feel like empowered. I don't feel like it's something I have to do. Whereas when we talk about it being a gift, it kind of switches it for me, because I suddenly have this vision of my life where actually the amount of times that true forgiveness needs to happen, where it really is costing you something. This isn't just like,
again,
this
not unconditional.
Yeah,
it
costs you something. But so, maybe there's I don't know how many times that happens in the span of someone's life. But in some ways, instead of seeing it as, oh, this is something I have to do, it's like, actually, maybe this is an opportunity where I get to give an incredible gift to myself.
There it is.
But then also to others. And then also it leaves this imprint and this legacy, and it envisions other people. And you said this earlier about how, when we see people who, in the face of incredible, devastating circumstances, like the loss of a child or something happens, and we see them get up on the news and say, I forgive that person, it inspires people, because there's something in us as humans that know we'd rather that way than the way of the hate cycle,
Yep. So in context, it triggers the sympathetic nervous system. The escalating flight or fight is what I call the tsunami of stress. Those core issues get triggered. Someone offends us. Somebody does something. And it triggers a sense of insecurity and inadequacy in us. Then that's a flee. And then it escalates into a fight, which is the distress and discontent over that. And we feel powerless. And then it escalates back and into avoidance and isolation we don't want to deal with, we don't feel we can deal with. And this is the avoidance and isolation, and the core issue in that is a lack of control. And that person having offended me, and that offense and the impact of it has control, and I don't have control. And then there is the fight that reprises and escalates into poor self-image and low self-esteem, resistance. I don't want to deal with that debt. Defiance, I'm not going to deal with that, and you should deal with that. And then anger, and I'm real angry about this. And then we're not assertive. We become passive or aggressive or passive-aggressive ourselves in response to it. And then our self-image, how we see ourselves, and the self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves, suffers from a lack of forgiveness. On the opposite side of that, and the thriving part of that, and that's about rational intimacy and how that connects to thriving, is that when we cultivate that sense of contentment, and we intentionally encounter stress and need, which being offended creates, but we do it with contentment, then we have a sense, and we give ourselves the gift of feeling secure and capable. What you did doesn't define me. What you did isn't something I can't overcome and deal with. Do you hear the forgive? It's a gift. But it's not just a gift to the other person, it's a gift to ourselves.
It begins being a gift to ourselves.
Yes, and my own well-being. I don't force on myself high blood pressure and cardiac issues and anxiety and depression and anger. I'm not inflicting that on me. I'm actually loving to me then. I'm giving myself a gift by forgiving.
And it's interesting you would use the word loving there too, because I'm just, back to the word fear, which is like, we've got to get fear out of the situation. And I was just reminded of that scripture verse that says, perfect love drives out fear. And so when we're swapping
because fear has to do with punishment.
And that is often why people stay in unforgiveness.
Because
they want to punish someone.
Yes, because that's justice, which it's not.
No, and it's actually punishing themselves.
Yes.
By default. But I think that is, so not only are we getting rid of fear, but we are embracing love of ourselves, love of others, that's going to be part of that journey in forgiveness, surely.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was an article from May 2019 in Psychological Health, and it was a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is looking at all the research been done, as much as possible, on the association between forgiveness of others and physical health. Not just our own mental health, but our own physical health. This meta-analysis tested the relation between forgiveness of others and physical health. with age, gender, race, education level, employment status, sample type, research design, types of physical health variables, and publication status as the potential moderators. All those things as characteristics. And the main outcome measures was that state forgiveness, forgiving an offense or an offender, measures, state forgiveness measures, trait forgiveness, a disposition to forgive, measures, and physical health measures were included in the meta-analysis. That's what they were looking for. Okay? The results that were retrieved from 128 studies in which the mean effect sizes showed a significant positive relationship between forgiveness of others and personal physical health. Yep. It did. To forgive others promotes your own physical health.
Yeah.
Thriving, not just surviving. And interestingly, no moderators of all those other ones, things like age, gender, race, education level, employment status, sample type, research, none of those other variables had anything to do with it.
That's amazing.
Thriving. Just your own physical health, let alone all the mental health benefits.
That's an incredibly loving thing to
forgive.
do for yourself.
It is an incredibly loving thing to do for yourself and for others. And so those core strengths with rational intimacy that supports thriving is contentment. And we feel secure and capable when we are the one forgiving, giving a gift. So we feel secure and capable.
Yeah.
And then we feel empowered. And our gifts, literally, right? Forgive is giving something. The second stage in rational intimacy is gifting, grace, charismi, forgiveness. It's right there.
Yeah.
And that's empowering. And in other words, a gift we're giving to ourselves is we feel empowered by doing it. And then the proactive involvement and connection, engagement, we become all the more influential, and it stops being an issue of control. It's not about being controlled by that person or what they have done and the impact of it on my life. It's not about that. It's about influence and being influential positively and beneficially in our own lives and in the lives of others. And then that fourth, devotion. And we have that sense of a healthy self-image and a sober self-esteem. And life is good.
Life is good. It's so helpful to go through those core issues,
yes,
I think.
Because that's the benefits of forgiveness.
So can we just touch on, like, because I'm trying to think why, and this is why, I'm trying to think, well, why do people get stuck? Why I think the idea of, like, this is a giving thing, not just a walking away thing. Like, that's so helpful to think. This is this opportunity that you get to have to give that propels you into this forward motion to thrive. And then, there's the repercussions around you will be beneficial too. But so I'm curious about why people get stuck. And I wonder, like, can we talk about justice? Because I think that this is, like, in the heart, like, there are justice type people. I think I'm one of them. And, like, I used to think it was a really great thing. And now I'm, like, thinking, I actually need to, I don't know. But it's so complicated, when you just feel like, that was wrong. And, like, you should pay. Like, what is all of that, Tom? Like, we talked about how, this justice has been based on this thing of an eye for an eye or a tooth for a tooth. And
and as Martin Luther King Jr. said, then we're all blind and toothless.
There we go. So that's not a great option. So yes. But there are going to be people who they get stuck in that. Or maybe it's more this, they confuse justice with forgiveness. Would you say that's correct?
Oh, absolutely.
So how do
they think that if there's justice, it will resolve it.
And that's the point. We know that for, someone who's tragically lost. I mean, I know I've known people in my life in past years who've lost, their kid because of a drink and drive driver, who's taken their 8-year-old out. And the point is, in that situation, is that actually, even if if it was an eye for an eye, that cannot pay that debt.
Exactly.
That actually is impossible. And so we get ourselves into this. So while there's
we're searching for something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Because the idea of justice is inherently about fair and equitable. If a life is taken, to take a life, okay, a life for a life, a tooth for a tooth, an eye for an eye. But how can there be any sense of payment or justice for the impact? How do you quantify that? It doesn't mean that that's irrelevant and that if someone has offended, a debt is owed. But it's the nature of why and how that is given. Inherent in any offense is a lack of empathy. Which is why the F, forgive fearlessly, follows E in our little alphabet which was energize empathy. Because if you don't energize empathy, you can't forgive fearlessly. You can't. You won't want to, because there isn't empathy to feel into. And if you're just listening to forgive fearlessly and you haven't listened to energize empathy, go back and listen to that one. Because that is what empathy is, what allows us the ultimate gift that can be given to self and others, where there was a lack of empathy manifested in the offense, is to return empathy, to respond with empathy to the lack of it.
And you're almost given the opportunity then for empathy to be energized and thrive. And
not almost. You may be modeling for that other person what they didn't understand or value. You may be helping them to understand something that they didn't understand. It wasn't a part of their life. Empathy. Why? Because in that case, they didn't have it, which is why they offended, which is why the one before the energized empathy is defer to loving. And the one before that is create contentment. And the one before that is believe in beneficence. And the root of it, the A that starts off this whole thing, is accept adversity. To not forgive is to not accept adversity.
Yeah, you're kind of just stuck.
I am not accepting this adversity, and you are going to make it right.
Whereas the reality is that is something that won't happen. That person can't make it right.
Even if a tooth is given for a tooth, or an eye for an eye, or a life for a life.
And we're not saying here that, there's no, like, obviously with crime and stuff like that, there's no actual but that's different from forgiveness. That's different from the, like you say, the internal impact, like whether a person spends time in prison or not,
or
won't actually do anything for what is happening inside of you. Can't. So the only way to change what's happening inside of you is forgiveness.
Yes, because what that invites in response from the other person is for them to really take responsibility, not just for what they did, but for the impact of what they did. Mm-hmm. Why? Because you're modeling an alternative way to deal with it. You're empathizing with yourself and the other person, invites them to take real responsibility, which isn't what they did, but was the impact of what was done. Mm-hmm. That's critical.
Yeah.
You're actually inviting them by proposing a solution, a resolution to the offense, and you're the one initiating that process. How empowering is that? How secure and capable would you be to be in that position?
Yeah.
How influential can that be? This isn't, and I want to clarify, it's the opposite of letting somebody off
the hook. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Letting them not be responsible. It's actually a way to invite them,
empower them
to be responsible mm-hmm. for what they have done. Mm-hmm. The other just lets them pay a fine. Or serve some punishment. That's all that does. That, if anything, that's an injustice.
Yeah, so
because the person doesn't have to actually feel responsible for what they did. They just have to take responsibility for the consequence and the punishment. That's no different than sending a child to their room because they've been bad. Mm-hmm. It's just on a very different scale, but it's still the same dynamic. And what does the child or the adult learn? If I've been bad and done something bad, I have to feel bad and do something that is bad. And that's all I have to do. I don't have to actually care. I don't have to actually feel. I don't actually have to empathize with the impact of what I've done. Mm-hmm. I don't have to do any of that. Mm-hmm. I just have to pay a fine or go to jail.
Mm-hmm. So to invite and which is a gift, which is the gift.
There it is.
Basically, this is a relational way of bringing justice, which is inviting the person who has caused harm to, you're kind of giving them an opening, a doorway into empathizing with the impact of what has happened,
yep.
so that actually real change has the potential to happen.
Yes.
For them.
And what they do or don't do with that isn't the issue. Mm-hmm. It's what I did, mm-hmm. what we did with that, and I can thrive rather than just survive what you have done. I can thrive because what I am doing, which is forgiving and forgive fearlessly.
That's so good, Tom. And I'm just thinking, as we're, as we look ahead for this new year and that we're in, and think of all of the things that could be in it. And I think it's such an important message for us to get hold of, right at the beginning, to think,
Because there's so many
this
grievances.
Will change things. This could determine whether, like on a macro level or a micro level, whether, me as an individual or the country or nations of the world survive or thrive.
Yep.
And there's an invitation, I think, to, can we do this? Can we live a different way so that we as individuals and as communities can thrive?
Yes.
I mean, I think that's really inspiring and
it's hopeful
and thought-provoking,
Yeah. Macro issues are just the collective micro issues.
So I think as we wrap this up now, just that encouragement to our listeners, it's not, we know that forgiveness isn't easy because there is a real cost involved, but then there's also a real gift involved. Yes. And that's why it actually can be incredibly envisioning to think, I get to do that. I get to give a gift to myself and others and inspire a different way.
Yep. And I get to thrive. And then I set the stage for us to thrive. You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.